People are going through all kinds of things around us. We might only see a piece of it, but like sometimes you can intervene in a very small tangential way that has a huge impact on someone's life. That's what the book is about too, right? Both Ryan meeting other people and other people meeting Ryan, maybe very briefly, but with an impact that lasts for the rest of these people's lives.
Hello everybody and welcome back to Serving Up Trouble. This is a podcast about everything women's table tennis with me, your host, Chloe Ireland. It feels so good to be back. I hope you guys have been training and enjoying your table tennis while I've been away. If you're new here, hi, welcome to Serving Up Trouble. It's a pleasure to have you. We release episodes every week talking about women's table tennis, and we interview players ranging from Olympians and Paralympians right to your local league players and personalities. Our aim is to increase the visibility of women in the sport and also just to have an excuse to nerd out and be a fan of women's table tennis players, and I take great delight in being able to do that. Let's get straight on to our guest this week. And this week, I'm delighted to say my guest is a writer whose articles and stories have featured in many publications, but from the ages of 9 to 16, she was a competitive table tennis player, a world which provides the backdrop to her new novel, Underspin, which comes out in the UK and Europe on the 5th of March. I am of course talking about the brilliant Emily Zhao, aka EY Zhao. I think I read somewhere that Emily has been referred to as the poet of table tennis, and I think according to this interview, she definitely deserves that title. I think this is the deepest conversation we've had on the podcast, and I just want to warn some of our younger viewers that some of the themes discussed are of a sensitive nature. We don't go into much detail about the contents of the book, but I would say that it is definitely for a more mature audience. That being said, if you're a big reader in the table tennis community and you would like to read a book set in the world of our sport, I cannot recommend this enough. Emily's publishers were kind enough to send me an advanced copy. I think it's fair to say that I absolutely inhaled it. I thought it was fantastic, and I really appreciate the themes of community. I think that's kind of a theme of this interview as well, and something that we always try and champion on Serving Up Trouble, about the community, the table tennis community, and what we owe to each other and how we can look after each other and support each other. And I think that is a really clear and important theme within the book. So without further ado, here's my conversation with the wonderful Emily Zhao, aka EY Zhao. First of all, I just want to say I finished this book on the tube, and I count you personally responsible for me missing my stop. So I've got my grudge.
Honor for a writer, honestly, is to make somebody miss their stop on the tube. So I accept your grudge. I accept it with love.
What is Underspin about? Can you explain a little bit about what this book is? And then we're going to get into a little bit about the writing process and some of my thoughts and feelings. And I have a lot.
In a nutshell, Underspin is about the rise and fall of a fictional American table tennis prodigy named Ryan Lowe. So Ryan begins playing when he's very young. He has a very intense coach who played in Germany, and he reaches the Bundesliga by the time he's 21. So has a very prolific career, and then quits and leaves the sport. And so the central mystery of the book, well, I guess it's not a spoiler to say that he passes away before he turns 25. So the central mystery of the book is what happened to Ryan, what happened in his career, what led to this downfall. But another essential aspect is that the book is narrated by people around Ryan in the table tennis community. So people from many different walks of life who have encountered him in some way, sometimes just fleetingly, sometimes as a coach or a lover or a teammate. And so in addition to the book exploring the central mystery of Ryan's life, it's also about the broader table tennis community, what the sport means to all the different kinds of people who have different relationships to it, and also what star athletes mean to people who spectate them. Like what role do these superstars play in our life, and what do we get from our relationships to them?
I've got to say, it was quite a surreal experience actually reading something like this from a world that I have been in since I was a child. It was because you just never, I mean, table tennis is still, I think in the UK and in the US as well, it's not as big as in other countries. We haven't had the same kind of successes in other countries. So it kind of feels very insular. You have your club, it's very separate from the rest of your life. You have your table tennis life and then you go out into the world. So it was actually very strange and actually quite affirming reading something where it's like, I know this feeling, I know this hall, I know these people, I can hear the ball, I can smell the smells. It was quite a weird experience, but in the best possible way.
I'm so happy to hear that because it's and I'm glad to hear that I seem to have described it accurately, because if you try to explain, I'm sure you've had this experience where you at your day job or just with friends who don't understand table tennis, you try to explain exactly what this underworld is that you live in and why you spend your time. I don't know. I spent a lot of time hanging out with like 65-year-old men
Yeah.
at the club. And why do you spend why is my best friend at the table tennis club a 65-year-old immigrant from Bosnia? And it's so special. So I'm happy to hear it resonated with you.
Absolutely. I mean, there's so much that I wanted to ask you about your relationship with table tennis, because this book kind of suggests some very complicated, at times contradictory ideas about the sport, and especially experiencing childhood in a sport environment. So I'd love to kind of hear a bit about, I mean, how did table tennis come into your life? And what was your experience with it growing up?
Yeah, absolutely. So I started playing when I was 9 years old. My mom had always played racket sports, especially tennis, but she decided that she wanted to dive back in and had heard through the grapevine in St. Louis, Missouri, which is where I grew up and is not a table tennis hotspot by any means, but we happened to have a coach who used to play on Shanghai's junior team. For whatever reason, she immigrated to St. Louis. This is as you know, a common story that very talented players just end up scattered across the world. And she had 4 tables in her basement in the suburbs of St. Louis. And I just started tagging along with my mom, and I had some affinity for it. So I started training pretty seriously at 9. And this often happens when you're a kid. If you're good at something, people encourage you to keep doing it. And I mean, I did enjoy the sport a lot, I think in part because I was good at it. I think as with anything you do a lot when you're a kid, my relationship to it is like inextricable from the process of growing up. So I had a lot of love for the sport. I wanted to be excellent at the sport. My coach wanted me to be excellent. I wanted to um, kind of meet the high standards that we had for myself. And at the same time, over the course of becoming very immersed in this competitive landscape, I encountered many of the usual like psychological and emotional foibles of it, feeling like I wasn't improving fast enough. I think especially for girls and women in the sport, feeling like when I got to a certain age, my body was changing, and that affected my game. But I think more so, um, like it felt like people were welcome to comment on girls and women's bodies because of the like public sporting arena in a way that was very difficult. There was the increasing pressure of school because there's no financial, I mean, it's better now, but back then there really was no financial future at all in table tennis whatsoever. Not that I was good enough to contemplate that. So I think by the end, it was this very ambivalent mix between what I really loved, which was actually there's the practice of the sport, the practice of trying to beat yourself, of trying to be better and learn, and being in community with people at my training center and at my club. Those were the most beautiful things that kept me going. And on the other side, there was all of this pressure around a certain level of performance, like looking a certain way, conducting myself a certain way. That was very hard and made its way into the book. So I think I think this is a pretty common story among people who played intensely as kids, and I hope that I did some justice to it in my novel and maybe in just talking about it.
I mean, I never kind of played that intensely as a child, but I think there's definitely parts of this that did resonate with me, especially the kind of emotions. So like, there's one character, I don't want to get into too much deeply into the book because I don't want to spoil anything for people, but there's a character called Lola that I kind of felt on a spiritual level. Kind of always the bridesmaid, never the bride, always aspiring for something that you, but inside you kind of know that you're not good enough for, and that kind of emotion. I think you definitely kind of captured that. I mean, it's interesting that you're kind of talking about the table tennis world and the fact that it is such a niche sport in a lot of places. Did you ever worry about making the book too niche? Did you trust that readers would kind of tune into the table tennis isms, the kind of the choing, the specifics about, how you describe rallies and kind of what's happening in the arena? Because I think a lot of it, it the emotions don't need explanation, but I just wonder if that was going through your head during the writing process. How do you get people into this world that they might not be familiar with?
Yeah, that was definitely something I considered maybe more near the end of the writing process when I was editing, because to be honest, to when I was drafting, and I think maybe a lot of writers, especially if you write literary fiction, have this sense. I wrote the book just assuming no one would ever read it or see it. And so I guess what that freed me to do was just write to my imagined best audience, which would be people who had some understanding of table tennis or were curious enough about it that they could meet me halfway in terms of understanding the terminology. And there were a few, like with the choing or with some of the more technical stuff, there were a few places I went back and inserted sentences explaining so that it was legible to a reader. But I actually chose pretty consciously to err on the side of just immersing the reader in the language of the game, the rhythm of the scenes. And much as one shows up to a club with no knowledge and over time through exposure and repetition picks up the lingo and kind of understands what's happening, I wanted to let the readers delve into the world and be immersed in it and start picking those things up on their own to a certain degree. And I think for the most part, I've heard from people who don't play table tennis and they're able to engage even though there's not a ton of hand holding. And that's something that I prefer as a reader too. Like when I read about other subcultures, I don't want to feel that the writer has been obligated to really go out of their way and simplify things to a point of inanity for me to feel welcome. Like I'm choosing to enter their world, and so I want to be a good guest as well. And so I feel that hopefully Underspin strikes a good balance in that regard.
You have quite an amazing way of capturing like the atmosphere, not just of a place, but of a person. Like we said, the story's kind of told through lots of different perspectives of kind of people who knew this central character, Ryan, and the kind of community that was around him. And I wanted to ask, what was maybe the easiest character to write for? This won't mean much to people who haven't read the book, but maybe people can come back. But what was the easiest character to write for, and who was the most challenging for you?
Yeah, I think the easiest characters for me to write were actually the awkward teens. So there's a girl named Ellen who is probably my closest self-insert. There's no one in the book who is really autobiographical. Like it's really not possible to map the details of my life onto anyone, but
Mhm.
maybe affectively she is the closest to me. But I think all of the kids, including the little boys who are Ryan's peers, and grow up with him. I think something that makes table tennis as a subject in an arena unique and uniquely suited to coming of age stories is, like you were saying, this additional layer of outsiderness that's inherent to the sport itself. So if you are a teenage person and you already feel kind of disconnected from your body, you're trying to figure out how to be a person, it just kind of feels like you're always the underdog. And then you spend a lot of time playing a sport that's considered strange and niche, and yet there's a ferocious hierarchy within it, that ups all the dials on these feelings of alienation and confusion that we experience at those ages. And so I think because of that, those chapters really just flowed out of me. I was able to tap really easily into how they might have felt, even though, I wasn't a 12-year-old boy, but I'm like, I can kind of figure out how weird.
You can get yourself there, yeah.
How weird and strange this was. And the most difficult characters to write were probably the two German guys who are at the crux of the second half of the book. So Coach Christian, who appears throughout because he's Ryan's coach, he has a chapter, and his former Bundesliga teammate, Eckert, who is now a sports psychologist, has his own chapter. And with those, initially, I faced one, I think the technical challenge of feeling like, oh, I'm trying to write to 45-year-old German men. That's about as
far away from your experience.
That's about as far away from my experience as you can get. And then two, they're both quite ethically compromised people, which I think we can all understand from our first person perspectives of feeling like you've done morally compromised things. But the specific things that they've done, I was like, how can I depict this with humanity, but also clear eyes? And I guess with those, I ended up being able to manage it through the language. So I took some German. I spent a couple weeks in Germany. And weirdly enough, once I started using more Germanic syntax, but in English, something started flowing. And then I just had to imagine, the worst thing that I felt I'd done, that feeling where it's like I was trying my best, but I still know this was not great and I feel guilty about it, and transpose it onto them and the things that they'd done, which I think are worse, but I don't know. So someone,
I hope so.
Yeah. It was that was an interesting long exercise of trying to get as far away from myself as possible and realizing that in the end, the only way out is through, and having to recenter in my own experience.
You kind of answered this a little bit with what you've just said, but I was going to ask about the sections of the book that are kind of set in Germany. So you kind of said you went to Germany. Did you, talk to some of the guys out there? Like, what was your process like trying to get some of this into place? Because it feels very immersive. It feels right, but I don't know if you were actually there at matches. Did you speak to some of the team? Like, what was that kind of process like?
Yes, that was kind of a magical process. Honestly, I had written up to the point where Ryan goes to the Bundesliga, and then I was like, oh no, I have to write him in the Bundesliga. What am I going to do? And this is what I love about the table tennis community, is it's ultimately so intimate and everyone is so open and friendly. I just cold emailed the press manager at Borussia Düsseldorf, the Bundesliga team, which is one of the best pro teams in the world. Alexander Schilling, who's their general manager. And I said, I'm writing a book and I'll be in Germany these weeks. Can I talk to any of the players? And he was just like, yeah, come by.
Oh,
and
brilliant.
So I went to Dusseldorf for 2 weeks. I spoke to Alex. I spoke to their manager, Andreas Preuss. I probably mess up that pronunciation, but I'm doing my best. I also spoke to Dong Chu and Kai Stumpe, who I think has transferred since, but at the time was playing at Borussia. I just asked them about their experience as pro players, about their experience managing players because that's also an important part of the book. And um, they were super helpful and kind and forthcoming. And even though some of the actual material didn't make it into the book, I feel like you were saying, just the atmosphere of being in the training hall, of hearing Andreas talk about player psychology and establishing those relationships and watching some matches helped me flesh out my depiction. And I also I just got to see some amazing table tennis. They were playing an exhibition, and Nina Mitchelham, Dima, Zibby, and Vinta, they were all there. So it was really a special week and epitomizes, I think, the best parts of the sport.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting going from, your relationship with table tennis as a teenager and as a child. Do you think that the process of writing this book has changed that for you in any way? Has it given you any different kind of perspectives on the sport? Like, what's your relationship to table tennis like now, having written this, having kind of put together all these pieces that you have?
Yeah, it's been very interesting and brought up more emotions than I anticipated. So I think the most evident thing is that through promoting and writing the book, I went back into the table tennis world as an adult with my own agenda and my own autonomy, and built so many of these beautiful relationships, including with you here. And that really reminded me and affirmed the best parts of the experience when I was younger, was just getting to be around all of these kind, amazing people. Um, the sport has changed a lot. So another wonderful surprise was just kind of reveling in its increasing popularity and the different kinds of people who have come into the sport since I was a kid. Um, and I do think another aspect of it has been revisiting and maybe validating for myself the very difficult parts of the experience. I think for a while, because I quit the sport and moved on with my life, some part of me was minimizing how it felt to play, the difficulties, the psychological effect it left. Some part of me felt like, well, it was just a thing you did. Probably you have exaggerated some of the bad parts, but um, obviously the book is about some very serious themes of abuse of power and the toll of pursuing excellence. And readers, former players, coaches, have come to me and said, wow, this reminds me of an experience I had, or that I saw some of my students have. Like, you captured it in an uncanny way. And I didn't know any of those stories. I had invented everything, but I hit a vein with things that are happening all the time in our sport and other sports. And so, um, in a kind of disturbing but also validating way, it all came back to me of like, yeah, there's some serious psychological impacts that this has on kids, that it had on you. Um, and you thought that you'd stepped away from it over time and by fictionalizing it, but like those were very real things. So I'm still metabolizing that, I think.
Many of us have actually brushed up against stories like Ryan's. And I think that's one of the things that's so brilliant about the book, is that we are experiencing his story through other people. It's kind of through friends, acquaintances, coaches, things like that. And I think that's actually quite a relatable experience, that we kind of see these stories happening almost blurred in the background kind of thing, and how do we interact with them. I think it makes you interrogate your own emotions around some of those interactions that you've experienced. I mean, was that one of the things that you wanted people to leave after they'd leave with when they'd finished the book? Like, was it to sort of look at some of these interactions in a new light?
Yeah, I think some of the main questions I had were about our obligations to each other as a community and as witnesses to each other's lives, and the unknowability of people's the unknowability of other people's experiences to a certain degree. So I hope people leave the book thinking about that. And I've had some people write on like Goodreads reviews like, oh, I left feeling really like hollow and sad. I'm not going for that specifically, but um yeah, I personally am, I think, fixated a lot on feelings of guilt and obligation and not being able to do enough for other
Mm,
people. Um Although contrarily, I feel that in table tennis, experienced many instances of people going out of their way to be kind to me and help me. And so I think I want it to be a yin yang
mm,
question, not just the hollowness and sadness, but also through the moments of kindness and support in the book. Like, okay, we
yeah.
know that people are going through all kinds of things around us. We might only see a piece of it, but like sometimes you can intervene in a very small tangential way that has a huge impact on someone's life. That's what the book is about too, right? Both Ryan meeting other people and other people meeting Ryan, maybe very briefly, but with an impact that lasts for the rest of these people's lives. So, um, yeah, I think that's one huge thing I hope people leave the book contemplating.
I definitely get the community aspect of it. That was something that, again, it was relatable because, you feel like you know these people and you have your club, and it's almost like, when you grow up there, it's, like you always feel, I've always felt like I've grown up with lots of like mad table tennis uncles, and,
Yes, exactly.
there've just been like people in my life that have just been there for, years. Um, but yeah, the kind of community aspect, I think really comes through. Is there anybody that was from your community that did have an impact on some of the characters in the book that did make their way into the writing, and maybe in small ways? I know you said it's not no character is a direct thing, but were there people that inspired some of the characters?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. There's a chapter set at a club in Indiana that centers around this couple in their 70s. So they're an amalgamation of a lot of people who are at the St. Louis Table Tennis Club. I'm from Missouri and I played tournaments in Indiana. So obviously that's kind of a geographical shout out. There's a referee named Kagan who, it, my friend Kagan is a referee. They're not similar personality wise, but he helped me so much with the book that I wanted to pay him tribute. Although maybe it's a curse to have a character in a novel named after you. And I think, yeah, like all of the other young people that I grew up playing around at my coaches and who I'd meet at tournaments, they all have had their personalities kind of mixed up and disseminated throughout the book. But I will shout out my friend Ryan Driscoll, who um, like drove me around to a lot of tournaments and was just really really great as a practice partner, and we'd play doubles. And so I named the main character after him. Again, maybe also to, maybe that's not something that he wants, but it meant a lot. And again, just such an unlikely friendship. I Someone I never would have met anywhere else, like almost all of my table tennis friends.
I read in an article kind of in preparation for this interview that you said that you love to write about infatuation even though you find it degrading.
Wow.
And I really wanted to ask you about this because I was like, that's an interesting statement. And I kind of get what you mean, but I'd love you to kind of like elaborate on it, because I think, especially when we're talking about competitive sports, and I think it's a different kind of addiction in a way, especially in the way that it kind of plays with some of the characters in Underspin. So, would you be able to talk a little bit on that about what, like, in fact, the infatuation and why is that kind of off-putting to you?
Yeah, that's so funny. I threw that line in there for fun because I was like, no one ever reads these interviews, so I'll just get away with it. Yeah, so I mean, so a lot of the book, I'm actually happy to be asked this question because a lot of the book is about yearning and about infatuation and projecting some desire you have or some need you have onto another person. I think the term limerence now is everywhere, and it's when you construct this idea of someone, maybe not based on things you actually know about them, but then develop a very strong attachment to it. And so sports idolatry is one form of this, right? Our worship of our star athletes, fan edits, whatever, like seeing something that you aspire toward or covet in another person. But I also think like actual, like romantic infatuation, like when you are in a small sports world, it's like very intimate. You see the same people over and over again, and there's the sense of, oh, only people who are in this world really get what I'm going through. And so, a lot of the characters have crushes on Ryan, or are like, infatuation is some way for them to, it's a way they're anchored in the world, and it's also a way that they try to escape circumstances in their own lives, or something that they're not happy about in their own lives. And I think sports really heighten that. And especially because it's so physical and physically intimate in a lot of ways. And I mean, I find it degrading because it's like it's like you're trying to cast yourself out of your immediate reality in a way toward this other person, but inherently you give up control by doing that. You're just like, I relinquish this part of my sanity to something outside of myself. And I might know that it's foolish to be infatuated with this Olympian, for example. Like, we'll just make something up. It's the Winter Olympics now, so it's a great time.
It's topical.
But like, I know I'm just fantasizing about this ice skater who I don't actually know, but it's doing something for me. And I feel like sometimes when I take a deep, hard look at what it is I'm trying to do mentally, emotionally, psychologically, it's like, oh yeah, like there's some stuff you have to sit with and think about. So which I believe is ultimately healthy, but sometimes in the process you're like, wow, I didn't realize that was in there.
It's like, I need to maybe see a therapist. Yeah, that's and just hearing you say that, it's actually kind of clicked for me more. I think there is a chapter in the book that really strongly plays with that idea of infatuation and the way that it can be degrading to a person who would otherwise be quite a sane, normal human, and what it can do to somebody's personality. I don't want to say much more than that, but it's kind of just hearing you talk about it. I'm like, I think I get that
Yes.
kind of element of things now.
They're sucked into the psychological swamp for sure.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you've not just done table tennis writing for your own novel. You've also written about big events. I think it was like the US Smash in Las Vegas. I saw that you published an article about that. And something that I had a little read of some of your articles, and something that I really admired was that in general, you're very honest. You're very real about table tennis and in general sport in in America, and also like these big events coming in and the change of it all. And I just wanted to ask you about how do you kind of, because I struggle a bit with this, how do you balance wanting to do service to the community, support the sport, while also kind of staying true and kind of laying out the work that still needs to be done? Because I think it's quite a hard line to cross, and maybe something that you had to wrestle with a bit with this novel as well, considering some of the themes.
100%. Funnily enough, I think I was more nervous about this when the novel came out than with the journalism, and I'll elaborate on that. But when the novel came out, again, for years I wrote it just essentially assuming no one would read it. It's a weird double think you have to do. And then I started sending it to people who were in the table tennis world, and I was like, OF, like we were marketing this as the first table tennis novel, and we're doing all the marketing and publicity is very woo woo, and then they're going to sit down and read it and realize how it actually is, which is yeah, not the gloves are off in terms of depicting some of the dynamics within the sport. Um, but I actually received very positive feedback about that. I think with writing, if it's false, people can tell. There's essentially no point in writing for deception. It's not a medium that bears that, at least if you want to do something real and true.
I guess
So
you were also asking yourself, like, who is this benefiting as well? Like, if you put something out that is kind of wishy-washy, only one side of the story for the sake of keeping face, what does that do for anybody? Does that actually make anything different to how it was before you published the thing?
exactly. And I think the primary relationship is with the reader. And I was talking about the imagined reader for my book, someone who's curious about or loves table tennis. And I imagine that my readers are grounded, smart people who have both eyes open. So if I go to the US Smash and I write some fluff piece, like that's a disservice to me as the artist. That's a disservice to the magazine that commissioned the piece and ultimately that's a disservice to the readers. And I don't think that it serves the sport to, and not just the sport, it doesn't serve anyone to depict situations falsely and try to cover up the things that aren't going well. And that's not my job as a journalist either. Honestly, what helped me stay truthful also was that I don't normally write journalism. And so when I got the commission, I was like, I better not screw this one up. So I wanted to make sure that I wrote a fair piece. But I think people in the table tennis world who I interviewed for it or who read it seem to feel glad that it showed all sides of the sport because they too want the sport to improve. They too want the problems to be raised to the authorities and for things to get better. And so if it ever gets to a point where that kind of hopefully fair critique is not welcome or causes some kind of problem, then we have bigger fish to fry. So yeah, I hope to be able to continue doing that coverage, and I'm grateful that people are reading it and seem to resonate with it.
We're nearly at the end of our time together. I mean, I'm having a lovely chat. It's been lovely to kind of, having recently read the book and talk directly to you. That's been really fun, and I have been really looking forward to it. I guess like one of the last things that I wanted to ask was, if you're kind of looking back on, who you were at the beginning of this journey, I guess when you started playing table tennis, as a young girl kind of growing up in the sport, what kind of things would you say to her with the perspective that you have now? And I know it's always a really tricky question. People don't always know or have anything that they would say. But I was wondering if have you thought about that question in the process of writing this, what you kind of wish that you had known or advice that you would impart to your younger self?
Yeah. I think I tell her, well, first of all, it's going to be okay. Um, and maybe secondly, just focus on the things that like you feel like are for you, and like be excellent for yourself. I think where I ended up not being able to continue pursuing the sport was when it felt like there was too much external pressure, or there was some benchmark or outcome that I was pursuing, and you really can't focus on your game that way, and you can't enjoy playing and improving that way. And something I observe a lot in friends who start table tennis as adults is just how much enjoyment they get from improving a little bit or like missing a fewer forehands during scrimmages. And I feel that because I started so young and so intensely, I left that phase almost immediately. But if I could go back, I would encourage myself to try and have that attitude and take pleasure in what you can do in the process of getting there, because that will always be yours, no matter what happens outside of you.
Thank you so much, Emily. Underspin, it's out on the 5th of March. Don't read it on the tube, you will miss your stops. But I would definitely recommend picking up a copy. I really enjoyed it. I felt very connected to a lot of the characters, and I think people from the table tennis world will definitely get a lot out of it. So please do pick up a copy. It's been wonderful to speak with you. Thank you for doing this, and hopefully I will speak to you again at some point, maybe.
Yes, would love that. Thank you so much for having me, Chloe. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to Serving Up Trouble. I will be back next week with a new format of episode. We're going to be doing something a little bit different, where on alternate weeks I give you a rundown of all of the women's table tennis news that you might have missed during the week. So it's going to be a bit of an experiment. I really hope that you tune in for that. If you'd like more from Serving Up Trouble, you can also follow us on Substack. Every month I'm going to be publishing an article about all sorts of interesting bits and bobs related to the sport. This month I'm releasing an article all about sports bras and my experiences with different styles of sports bra within table tennis. So if that sounds something that would be useful to you or perhaps entertaining for you, then please follow us on there. If you'd like to support the podcast, please consider leaving us a review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. I know it sounds cringy to be like and review, but it really does help people to discover us. If you'd like to get in touch, please do so. You can email us at servinguptrouble@gmail.com. That's servinguptrouble@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week. Bye.